Hello, good afternoon. I'm Vela. I'm journalist at the Jakarta Post, and welcome. And thank you very much for attending JakPost Up Close. This is our 9th webinar, and I'll be your MC of the day. Our topic today is Educating the Nation 2020-2025, and more than 1,500 people have registered. So we're honored to be able to discuss with Education and Culture Minister Nadiem Makarim about the nation's education amid the COVID-19 pandemic and ahead of Indonesia's 75th anniversary next week. However, I would like to apologize because the talk show is not live, but pre-recorded. So we recorded the interview this morning because Minister Nadiem had been summoned by President Joko Widodo at this very hour. But the interview will be relayed to our YouTube channel too, so I hope and I believe that it will not decrease our enthusiasm to discuss about Indonesia's education this afternoon. So before we start, I would like to explain our agenda today. The 1-hour talk show with Minister Nadiem was conducted by Deputy Managing Editor Adisti Sawitri, or Mbak Witri. And after we air the talk show, we will have a quick break. And then we will start the panel session with 4 distinguished speakers, which will be moderated by my fellow reporter, Gema Holiani Cahya, or Holly. And good journalism needs your support. If you want the Jakarta Post to contribute more to public discourse, subscribe today on www.thejakartapost.com/packages. It costs only around 50,000 rupiah per month, and you can pay it with GoPay. So once again, thank you very much for participating in this webinar. Without further ado, we will now start airing the talk show. Please enjoy.
Good morning, Pak Nadiem. Thank you for joining us today in one of the Jakarta Post talk shows and webinars to celebrate the country's Independence Day.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Pak Nadiem, Indonesia is 75 years old this year, a quite long journey for a nation. We have achieved a lot, yet we have still many challenges ahead, especially in education. We are happy today that you can share your insights and plans about how to overcome these challenges. First, Pak Nadiem, President Jokowi has a big vision for the country's 100 years anniversary in 2045. He envisions Indonesia to become a developed country with a monthly income of 27 million rupiah per capita. Can you share with us the roadmap or the main strategies from the government to realize this vision?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me here. It's a real honor and privilege to be able to be doing this seminar. Going into the president's vision of SDM Unggul, I think there are key elements to this strategy that are related to education and the educational systems, and there's also an aspect outside of the educational system. I can speak on the scope that is about developing the next generation of our human resource. And I think that a few of the key principles here is, one is we are trying to create a next generation, a new generation that is relevant to the real world, that is relevant to the needs of the workforce, but also have specific skill sets that is able to adapt in the new era of technological advance and a new era of hyper change that is constantly happening in the economy because of technology and just because of the dynamics of the modern economy that mandate a huge amount of change constantly. So the strategy for how to develop the next best generation of leaders and the most effective and productive members of society always stem from its educational system. This is the highest return on investment a country can make to actually change the quality and productivity of its labor force, of its economy, is through the educational system. So a few things. For lower education, the big strokes of the overarching strategy is, first of all, what are we trying to achieve? What kind of a human is our educational system trying to develop? And this is where the Profil Pelajar Pancasila, or our kind of 6 student profiles that is based on our kind of national ideology, which is Pancasila, is, and I'll do a rough translation of what this means because it's actually in Indonesian. The first is spirituality and morality and integrity. The second is diversity and tolerance and nationalism. The third is independence. The fourth is collaborative skill, the ability to work in teams. The fifth is creativity and innovativeness. These profiles, the most important part about these student profiles is that this sets the parameter and objectives of our educational system. So once we have determined that, then the strategies to achieve that become much more clear. One, the most important transformation that is required is on the teaching side. The human development within the educational system depends on the quality of teachers. And so we have kind of a 3-pronged strategy for teachers. The first is to ensure that the next generation of leaders coming from our professional training programs are at a standard that are able to create lasting and permanent change. So what we're choosing as the next generation of teachers are not just teachers that are, smart and tech savvy and have a passion for teaching, but also are potential change agents and can create islands of change once they arrive in the schools. So don't forget, we have 70,000 teachers retiring almost annually every year. So this new supply of teachers is an extremely important part of the strategy of regenerating talent in the system and creating transformational change. The second is principals. We have created a new type of selection process that will identify the existing crop of teachers that are already in the system today and who has the leadership potential and who has the willingness and passion to mentor other teachers. So we are gearing for these, what we call guru penggerak, or movers, teachers who are movers and shakers, will actually be able to, we will facilitate them to take leadership positions in the educational system, to become principals, to become superintendents, and also teachers of teachers in the teaching institutions, professional teachers for new teachers. So that's the second part. The third part is the concept of training needs to dramatically change for teachers, which is training within a school versus being trained in some kind of theoretical academic setting. We're creating teacher training schools with students. And this is what we call the concept of sekolah penggerak. And the goal here is to create 10,000 of these in the next 4 years in order to create real pragmatic teaching experience and mentor teachers and schools in the communities around those 10,000 schools. The second part, that's the human part. The second part is now curriculum. And the whole concept behind curriculum is the ability to teach at the right level. So the concept of Merdeka Belajar also gives independence to teachers to be able to treat the curriculum like a menu as opposed to as a set course meal, and be able to actually pick and choose and redesign curriculum in a way that suits the level of competency and the level of interest of their students. So this is a really restructuring of the curriculum to fit diagnostics that the teachers can do to their students. So we're not teaching 1 year ahead of the students' capabilities, 2 years ahead sometimes. World Bank has cited multiple research citing that Indonesian students, a lot of them are 2 years behind in the curriculum. So teaching at the right level is fundamental for learning to happen. And then, of course, the digitalization of schools and the ability to access the world's information by having the right equipment, internet access, and the platforms and software platforms that allow the principals and the teachers to not focus all of their time on administrative tasks and reporting tasks, but to automate those systems through technology so that they are able to focus truly on the education part, on the pedagogy part of their job. And so this is quite a key element of our technology strategy. And for higher education, there's many more things that we're doing on lower education, but those are the broad strokes. But on higher education, really the concept is about how do we foster the largest amount of collaborative partnerships in the university by moving people around to create a true ecosystem that goes beyond the walls of the universities. So what we're talking about is trying to move as many university students to have as part of their university experience off campus through internships, projects, social projects, teaching projects, anything to get them out of campus and into the real world to learn the real soft skills. The second thing is also professors, getting them out of campus to get real world experience through sabbaticals, exchange programs, and work experience as well. And the third part is getting the best of the industrial world, the best of the professional world to come to university and teach, right? And then from a curriculum perspective, really shifting how universities teach from the lecture-based kind of one-way information dissemination to a two-way participatory type of work where, the two kind of models of this are the case study method and project-based learning, where you're training all those elements of the 6 profiles that I discussed before. Creativity, collaboration, critical thinking. Oh, sorry, I almost forgot. The 6th profile of that was actually critical thinking, problem solving. I almost forgot. It was one of the most important things, actually. And yes, so it's really about blending the outside world of campus into the world so that we're not just training our university students in a swimming pool. We're actually training them in open water so that by the time they do have to swim in the open ocean, they're prepared. One final big thing for lower education that I almost forgot was we are changing the national exam to actually follow the global PISA standard and creating assessment competency that is much more akin to a global standard of numeracy and literacy instead of breadth and volume of information to what it was before. So that's a pretty fundamental shift that we're doing because we can't improve anything without measuring the right thing. Sorry, that's a bit long, but it is a big strategy. There's a lot more to it than that, but I could take days to explain that.
Yeah, and it's very, very interesting and very enlightening, your vision about the education. So there are 3 main parts of the vision, the strategy, which is the human part, the curriculum, and then the technology. And it's also interesting that you're encouraging people from the campus to go to the open water instead of a swimming pool. And it's actually that's one of the things that we can do more in the future. But with all this great vision and great plans, great strategies, now suddenly we have the pandemic. And so at this critical time, what are your priorities? I think to some extent, and we have seen it, the Education Ministry has scaled back in terms of its plans and programs. Can you tell us a bit more about your priorities in this critical time?
Yeah, only a few months into the launch of our various programs, the COVID-19 pandemic hit. And it really brought everything into disarray because the schools, because of the health concerns, the schools had to close. And so all of a sudden overnight, learning basically stopped. So we had to basically shift gear completely and try to kind of save as much as possible learning for our students in the world's largest archipelago, with massive discrepancies in access to internet, electricity, affordability of data. It's a gargantuan task, actually, to make sure that kids are still learning and not just not learning at all from home. And so we had to try literally all type of channels. For kids that could not have access to internet, we opened study from home education content on our national TV station. We did public radio. We partnered with many of the technology companies focusing on edtech to be able to offer these services to schools. We had to help rearrange our budget system for schools to open it up to allow for data, to pay for internet for both students and teachers, and to pay for various health preparation standards, as well as to support the economic aspect of schools that are hit by the crisis as well. One of the things we did was we had to kind of reformat and restructure the curriculum and simplify it dramatically, which would normally take years to do, but we had to do that in a matter of 3 months, and had to really dramatically simplify the standards of achievement in order to focus on the truly foundational and essential parts of the curriculum. Because what happens when everyone is adjusting to this new mode of learning and education, when teachers are being forced to cover every aspect of the curriculum, then teachers are not able to have the time to adjust and kind of focus deep into what are foundational, like numeracy, literacy, character development, and psycho and emotional development, especially for the younger kids, if every part of the curriculum needs to be achieved. And so the impact of that previously that we've seen was parents and teachers were and students were just getting overwhelmed by the amount of basically homework that they had to do with very limited guidance from parents. So we created this new kind of emergency curriculum that dramatically simplified the competencies and competency achievements that were mandated and required. We also canceled the national exam for this year. We were going to do it anyway for next year, but we accelerated that. And I think one of the most important things is for elementary school, we actually went ahead and developed day-by-day modules that parents can actually do with their children with teacher guidance, and legalize it as a valid optional curriculum for the teachers if they want to implement that. So at elementary school, the participation of parents has become one of the most important factors of the success of distance learning. So we had to reimagine the curriculum from the perspective of a parent instead of a teacher. And so we just launched that recently. So a lot of things that we're trying to do in parallel, but huge amount of challenges. We all know from global research, not just in Indonesia, that distance learning is not optimal at all. It is even less optimal the younger you are, and even at an older age, it's still not optimal. And it totally depends on the motivation of the student, the motivation of the parents that are next to the student at any given time, and of course, because all the infrastructure limitations and issues, it is affected by the stability of all of that infrastructure. So it is a massive challenge. So my priorities right now is for schools that must do only distance learning, we need to optimize the distance learning. But for other schools in the lower risk zones, we are trying to get kids back to school as much as possible, but as safest as possible. It is one of the most impossible trade-offs to decide between. How do you make a trade-off between the health risks as well as the permanent loss of an entire generation's education risk for areas in Indonesia that simply cannot do distance learning or find it extremely hard because of infrastructural and challenges.
Okay. Yeah. The risk of learning loss is indeed something that is very real for us if we want to continue if we are forcing the distance learning, which most of our students are not ready for it. But about the school reopening, actually, it's a bold move, considering that Indonesia hasn't tested enough. And many teachers, parents criticize this decision. How do you respond to the criticisms?
Sure. So, I mean, you can see it in some aspects as bold. And on another side, you can also see it as we're a little late. If we look at Southeast Asia, we are the second last to reopen schools out of the 11 countries in Southeast Asia. All of them have already begun prioritizing the reopening of schools in stages with health protocol. So Indonesia, just to be clear, we are only allowing the face-to-face learning in the green and yellow zones, which represent somewhere around 40 to 50% of our districts. And 88% of our most poorest and most outer periphery kind of lowest infrastructure regions, 88% of these less advantaged regions are in the green and yellow zones. And those are the regions actually that where most of the students find it extremely difficult to do any type of technology-based distance learning. So it's very important to kind of highlight that even though the central government has allowed this to happen, even in the green zones, which you've let happen about 2 months ago, only about 25% or so of the schools have actually decided to do face-to-face learning. So the local government can decide not to do it yet. Even if the local government decides to reopen schools, the principal needs permission from the school committee, which is the representative of the parents and local communities in every single school, before they can begin to do face-to-face learning. And even if the school itself does face-to-face learning, the parent can individually decide not to send their child to school, and they can continue the distance learning. Not only that, so the idea of kind of face-to-face learning, there's a lot of misperception about this. Face-to-face learning, even if they do begin this face-to-face learning, it's with 50% capacity, which means they have to do a minimum of 2 shifts. So at any point, 50% of the student body is not in school. They're still just learning from home. The second part is the canteens are closed. All the common activities and extracurricular activities are closed. They have to maintain a 1.5 meter social distancing rule within the classrooms and observe all kinds of extremely tight checklists and health protocols. That's why not all of the green zone schools could actually start. It takes time for them to prepare and get ready for the whole checklist. So to be very clear, this is actually one of the most conservative kind of processes of reopening up. For orange and red zones, which is most of our cities and big cities, it's absolutely not allowed to do any type of face-to-face learning. So for us, it's yes, you can see it in one way as bold, because we have to admit that yes, there's always an element of increased risk in doing this. But when we have 50% of our population struggling immensely for reasons that are not their fault, that are not able to follow distance learning, the gap between them and the more well-to-do part of the economy, and between the cities and the outer regions, that gap, which was already massive pre-pandemic, is about to be, could be potentially permanently unbridgeable. It'll be so big, the gap between the haves and the have-nots in Indonesia, that it could create one of the biggest discrepancies in economic, social, psychosocial developments that will be felt for many years to come. So the government needs to see this from a multidimensional angle. We as a government cannot just see this as a health crisis. We need to also see this as an economic crisis, and we also need to see this as an education crisis. And not a lot of people are talking about this educational crisis being at the same level of importance as the economic and the health crisis, because it involves the next generation, it involves our kids. And so this is something that we need to balance in our consideration and policies, but still maintain as strict of a health protocol as possible.
Okay, so actually for students, teachers, and regions, if they decide not to do the face-to-face learning process, they actually can say no to that.
Of course.
But what happened to the students if their teachers and their parents decided not to allow them to go to schools?
The school is not allowed to punish them or penalize them for that decision, because anyway, the kids that are going to school are only doing that 50% of the time. Therefore, any school that starts face-to-face learning is still doing 50% of the time distance learning. So those kids whose parents, they're not comfortable with sending their kids to school, just follow the distance learning component of the school.
So it's totally okay, actually, if they don't do the face-to-face.
And I say this again and again, it is ultimately the parents' decision. Even the school itself reopening requires the permission of the school committee, which parents are represented in that committee. They are the main voice in that committee. Parents choose a representative and they vote whether or not the school is ready to do face-to-face learning. So the central government is simply setting the boundaries of which regions are able to decide on their own, which is the yellow and green zone. After that, it's up to the local governments, it's up to the parents and the principals.
Okay. And you have mentioned about the risk of learning loss. Is there any real estimation about how far we will lag behind after this pandemic time?
We won't know until we do some extensive research, and it might take a couple of years to be able to see the impact, maybe more. But what we do know are cases in disaster-stricken areas in the world. There's research being done on what happens when kids can't go to school for an extensive period of time, and the impact is significant. The impact is not just on the cognitive aspect of it, it's also on the emotional and psychological well-being of the student. What's happening right now in Indonesia and in other countries is not just a loss of learning. The level of stress that actually being confined, stress, loneliness, tension with parents. I mean, any parent knows this right now. Any parent who's living with their children right now understands that, you know, it's not easy. It's not easy spending this much time having to help them at every stage of their schooling, etc. For a lot of parents, it's a massive adjustment process. So we're seeing a lot of tension, psychological tension and pressure right now on both parents and students. And to be honest, a lot of loneliness. Can you imagine the psychological impact of kids that are not able to play with their friends? This is, no one really talks about this as a huge and potentially permanent psychological impact to kids feeling lonely for extended periods of time. I mean, I don't remember us ever having this many kids not being able to see their friends for this amount of time. These are not small issues that we need to dive deeper, and we need to mitigate them, but without sacrificing too much of the health risk. So again, the impossible decisions that we have to make as a government and as an educational system. You go one way, people will criticize. You go the other way. I mean, when we did everyone as distance learning, the amount of backlash from students and parents that cannot afford to buy data, that say, please let us go to school once in a while so that we don't have to break the bank on data. So there's always going to be two sides and two voices on this, but ultimately the government must balance those interests in the best way possible for Indonesia.
Okay. So by reopening schools, will the government continue to develop the distance learning? For instance, like many suggest that the government work with telco providers to provide gadgets and subsidize phone credits for students, for instance. Is this something in the pipeline?
This is definitely something that I will be fighting for. You know, we've pretty much reallocated all of the budget within the Ministry of Education itself to all things related to COVID and the critical programs to support this distance learning. You know, I think part of the next phase is we're hearing a huge amount of people are the cost of data is creating a significant economic impact for parents, especially for parents that have more than one child. And that is something that I think I will fight for the central government to kind of think about what we can do to further support and mitigate that problem. I think that the equipment and standards, etc. Yes, we have observed that to be also a big gap, but more so, we've heard the biggest issue is the affordability of data, because even in villages in Indonesia now, a lot of people are able to access a smartphone from either their neighbor, or someone nearby. The penetration of smartphones is bigger than most people would think, actually, in Indonesia. But yes, there's big parts of the population that still need that support. So we are fighting, and we are constantly going to kind of push for some support in the data cost perspective. And we are undergoing discussions with operators of telcos as well to be able to achieve that. So fingers crossed. I cannot promise anything, but it's something that we will fight for.
Okay, fingers crossed, Pak Menteri. And this is something about, well, you took a great leap. You are someone that has made it very well in tech industry, and you took a great leap to go to lead the education ministry. Now that you are almost 1 year in office and more exposed to education problems and learning conditions in many parts of Indonesia, from those who live in cities with good learning infrastructure to those in remote areas, how has this experience changed your perspective?
I think, firstly, I think I've come to terms with the limitations of technology in the educational space. This job would be much simpler if software could just somehow improve, like AI-based education, right? Or all those fancy buzzwords that we use sometimes in the education space to show like, oh, automation is the future, all kids will be learning from home, everything will be personalized and customized. But that's simply not the case. Education is a very personal, and heavily dependent on face-to-face interaction, because students, especially at the younger age, their prerequisite to learning is actually trust and safety to the adult or the mentor in front of them. And that interactivity with another human being, many research has proved this time and time again, that interaction is what actually builds the neural networks in a child's brain. And that trust with a physical person and the building of that relationship is what then triggers the emotional component of learning, which is the key to lifelong continuous learning, the constant feeling that I can be better, I'm good enough to know more and learn more, and I will seek knowledge all my life. What is referred to in Western discourse as the growth mindset, right? So this is that depends on an emotional layer that is so important to be established by humans, by adults in the system. So at the end of the day, I've come to realize even more so that at the end of the day, the best use of technology is to help the humans be able to get better at what they do. To the humans here being the teachers, right? And instead of replacing them or substituting them, no, but it's to enhance the capabilities of the teachers and the principals in the system to do what they're meant to do, which is everything for the children, for the development and learning for the children. So I've come to terms with the limitations of technology on that, but the impact that technology can have on how the efficiency of the system, the transparency of the system, the measurability of the system, the impact of that in the education space of software is absolute. It's incredible. The impact, the saving, the economic savings we can have, the transparency, the flexibility of the curriculum, none of that can be achieved without technology. But everything needs to support the human element of technology. And so I think that's my biggest learning. that I've had, outside of obviously many other learnings about adjusting to government, bureaucracy, and the different systems of politics in government that I had to learn very quickly.
Okay, despite all the technological progress, actually, it ends up to the human development, actually, that we should be focusing on.
Absolutely.
Okay, Pak Menteri, probably this is the last question. Probably you have a last message for our students and teachers out there during this pandemic.
Yes, I think that from me, what I'd like to say is, first of all, thank you for the enormous amount of patience in this difficult time. My sympathies go out to all the teachers and parents and students right now who are going through some of the most disruptive and painful kind of experience in having to do distance learning, in having to change modes, and having to learn unfamiliar technology with very limited conditions and very, very limited resources to be able to do that. But I salute and appreciate all of the beautiful stories that we've heard in the field of teachers coming and visiting students that have no access to internet, one door by door, teachers opening remedial classes for kids that are a little bit behind. Just the sheer amount of support and social cohesiveness that is happening as a result of this crisis within the educational community and the educational units is amazing. And I applaud and would like to say how amazed I am and how proud I am to be an Indonesian to see our nation really step up during this time of crisis.
Okay, thank you very much, Pak Nadiem. This has been a very insightful talk this morning, and we wish you good luck to all of your programs.
Thank you so much. It's been an
So that was our interview with Education and Culture Minister Nadiem Makarim. He several times reiterated his concern about the government plans to reopen school, despite the fact that the curve is yet to flatten, about the 50% capacity, about the parents' choice whether to send their children back to schools or not, and how the government keeps working on simplifying the curriculum and trying to work with telco companies even to support the distance learning all across the country. He also admitted that Indonesia will in fact face even wider gaps, education gap, economic gap, social gap among people. Minister Nadiem even mentioned potential psychological effects on distance learning for our children and how it will eventually show in the long run. One of his sentences that makes me nod my head many times is that this is not easy, and whatever policies that the government make at times of pandemic like this will always receive criticism.